This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week on AntiSocial Hangouts, we're joined by Ian Kirkpatrick, a fellow member of the Beauty and the Beta fan community, who I've had some fun conversations with behind the scenes. She runs a YouTube channel where she discusses all manner of political extremism to serial killers and primarily talks about her own work as a writer. Did I get everything, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I kind of talk about writing and culture and how stuff falls together and what I read, and yeah.
Yeah, so I know you just, you mentioned recently that you just got your first book published. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, my debut novel, Dead End Drive. It's a dark comedy, so, it's mildly offensive if you're easily offended. One of the bad guys blatantly says, "Honey, I'm a saint, not a Jew," after doing something a little unkind. But it's inspired by a 1993 board game, if you've ever heard of it, 13 Dead End Drive. I was really big into board games when I was a kid. And so the story itself is mansion are called to meet at the mansion for a will reading after the lady of the house dies. And throughout that will reading, it's basically a Hunger Games battle royale. Everybody kills everybody, and the winner in the morning gets all the money. So
I like that. That sounds, based on what I know of you, that sounds like a very you premise. So,
and it likes to take what you would expect in a murder mansion mystery personalities, and turn the cliches or the tropes up to 10. So you've got this super hot, well-fit tennis player whose clothes are just a little too tight, who's not very smart. And of course, the gay Jewish stylist from New York. So,
glad to see Milo's getting work nowadays, but so what was the process of writing that like then?
It actually started, I knew that when I'd originally played the game when I was a kid that I was so drawn to this book this game because I love, obviously, killing and serial killers in Minecraft. And so I knew that I wanted to write this, but I didn't know how for the longest time. And I started actually writing it on my own in maybe 2010, 2012. And I only got like 3 chapters in before I was like, I can't do this. So I submitted the first couple of chapters to a graduate program in writing, and it actually became my graduate thesis.
Wow.
Which was difficult when I was surrounded by I was going to college or graduate college for creative writing during 2015, 2016, where all of the creative people in that program hated Donald Trump. And so my main mentor for that book, actually, the first time we sat down to talk together, all he read were the sample pages, and he says to me, first thing, "How does it feel to be writing a book that will never be published?"
Oh my gosh, that is brutal. Why did he say that?
I don't know, because I don't know. It's not really helpful as a student, and even if this is just a learning process, as a lot of books are, or a lot of starting writing things are, you don't need to say that to somebody who might just be learning to write through that book anyway. But I don't think that it really mixed with his style or his brain. He's also German, so he was a German immigrant. So who knows? And then I had a second advisor at the very end of the program who was just the second to see that I finished my thesis to comment on it. And he said that it reminded him a lot of Objectivism and Ayn Rand in his response. And he was a poet, so he didn't really like Ayn Rand. He liked stuff to be a little more fluid. But I'd never heard about Ayn Rand before that, and so then I started reading about her. But that was interesting. But that was the process. As I took it, I submitted it to the program. I used the program to force me to write my whole way through the book. After I finished the thesis in 2016 to graduate, I edited a lot more after the program ended to finally publish it this year.
Oh man, like I mean, I was talking on Twitter recently with one of my acquaintances, and I very much made the point. There's no correlation between writing quality and the ability to get published. So the fact that this guy is just like, oh, there's no way this is ever gonna get published, like, well, first off, no. You gotta hit the right person on the right day. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. But good grief, that is a brutal comment. I mean, I have friends who are also doing writing projects and their post-grad work right now, and I know that's brutal to do, especially depending on what you're actually trying to go for in your post-grad. Because I mean, one of my friends in particular she wants to do a fiction. She wants to do like a book of Arthurian poetry for her graduate thesis, and she's having a hard time convincing the people that run the department that that's what she wants, what would actually be good for her career, because they're like, why the heck do you want to write poetry for your graduate thesis? I mean, like, you're not going to be able to use it. And she's like, I want to be an editor, so it doesn't matter.
Well, at least that was the good thing about the program I was in. At least half of the professors were poets. And the chair that came in, the dean that came in halfway through my program, she was a poet. And they were all very blatantly, you're never going to make any money as a poet. Poetry does not make you money. But they were still obviously teaching poetry as the graduate in this program. So,
oh man, I don't even know any contemporary poetry. Poetry is like one of the, I've talked about this on Twitter before, but poetry is one of those weird things where you just don't see very much of it post like 1950 that's actually readable, or a lot of modern poets are activists. Yeah,
that's what a lot of it is turned into.
I see that all the time when I look through the poetry section at Barnes & Noble. It's either like 3,000 years old, or it's like some sort of like flowery, vaguely progressive sounding something poetry that I'm not quite sure what it is, but I just know I'm not going to like it, so I don't bother.
In my first term, I remember, so every term we were required to read one nonfiction, one fiction, and one poetry. And in my first term, it was Something in Milk. I can't remember what it was called, but that was the poetry.
Honey and Milk, I think?
I don't know if it was Honey and Milk. It was by Carmen something or something.
I've seen that, but I don't know what it is.
I looked at it, I was like, I bet this is angry vagina poetry. And then I start reading it, and it is exactly that. But so then you obviously had that going on that most modern poets are activists. So you had the feminist poetry in first term, and then all I remember from the next 2 or 3 terms for the poets that we had to read were like Black Lives Matter, anti-police style poetry.
Oh man, I've seen like I had never actually read any poetry like that. I've seen like the people that get on stage and do like the chanting in unison where I don't even know, I forget what it's called. It's, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I went to this really weird poetry reading a couple years back because a friend of mine from college was like, I'm going to be there. And then he wasn't. But it was in this place that was a makeshift. It looked like a bomb shelter in Fallout. So the walls were open. It had blankets hanging over it. And so this was some kind of weird experimental poetry where they had somebody on the stage up front doing like interpretive dance to the poetry the whole time. And then they had somebody else on the stage with a different array of items they could make sound with, like a saw and stuff that they could bang. And so every so often they'd pick something up and they'd just start wiggling the saw to make the sound that the metal makes when it...
Oh my.
While somebody was reading poetry. And the only thing I remember from this was this one guy that went up to do his poetry and he just started screaming at the sky. He was wearing goggles. He looked like he was from a steampunk book. And he just started screaming, the eyes, the walls have eyes, the sky, the flies on the... It felt like the end of the world had happened, and this is all that was left of entertainment.
Oh my gosh, that sounds awful.
It was very surreal.
Do you live, or have you lived in like a overly hipster area, or are you relatively free of that phenomenon?
I lived in St. Petersburg, Florida for a year.
Is that like hipster central? Because I deal with a lot of that out where I live. Like
Go ahead.
If you ever spend any time on the north side of Chicago, it is 90% gentrified communist hipsters. Every other building is like a craft beer store or an old record shop. That's all there is for like miles.
I know now. So I visited, my best friend lives in Minnesota, and up until just recently he was living in Minneapolis, and it is exactly that. There is just like every building, the churches, every single building has the love has no, or hate has no place here signs, the rainbow signs, the communist drawings on the sides, and like every fifth person looked like a transsexual.
I mean, my favorite is always when you see the posters with whatever current politician is in office, regardless of party, that has the they live face. So it just looks like an alien. And it's because, and they hate every single politician because they're all freaking communists. So there's like, oh man, every single one of them. You saw it with Clinton, you saw it with Trump, you saw. I'm sure there's a Biden version of it by now, but oh man, the only thing I like about those areas is that the food's pretty good, and there's a lot of like things you can actually like do there if you just want to like find a walking around place. But gosh, I would never want to live there. It is awful.
Yeah. I really like the stuff that's around Minneapolis. Like Como Zoo is really cool. It's a free zoo that's over there. And there are obviously a lot of really cool small things to do over there, but just walking around the city or being in the city is bizarre and very uncomfortable.
It's probably like Portland, or what was left of Portland before the last year. I don't know.
Is a lot less awkward than walking around Minneapolis.
So are you free from that now? I don't know. I don't want you to dox what part of Florida you're in, but have you been able to get out of that nonsense, or are you still?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I'm not in St. Pete anymore.
Okay.
But St. Pete wasn't anywhere like Minneapolis.
Yeah.
It had some more hipster elements to it, but it was a lot more chill.
I see your puppy behind you. It's just.
Oh yeah.
Like, I remember I went to Atlanta over the summer, and I was surprised by how hipstery that city was. Like, I thought that was going to be relatively safe, but there were some parts of Atlanta where I'm like, these people look like they should be walking around an anime convention, unironically, and I don't know why they're in the deep south, I guess there are enclaves everywhere if you look hard enough, but I'm so used to seeing it up here, it's like, why are you down there?
How did Atlanta compare to where you live now?
Once you've been around to like a lot of the major cities, you realize just how similar most of them are. Like I just this last summer, I've driven through Nashville, Little Rock, Atlanta, Louisville, and it's weird just how similar they are. Like externally, like driving through them, they all have the same skyscrapers. They all have the same kind of feel to it, especially at a distance. Like, I'm sure if I hung out with someone there and then they took me around, they could find all the nice restaurants, but it is so gentrified and ugly. Like, there's no real local flair. Like, I remember when I went to New Orleans, that's one of the few cities I've been to that actually felt like a unique city. Because because most of the downtown area is still the authentic French Quarter, and there's still something to it, but so many cities now, it's just ugly glass skyscrapers and craft restaurants, and you realize really quickly how depressingly similar everything is once you've been everywhere in the country and you realize that every single block has a Walmart and a McDonald's on it.
I was actually talking about this with my family this morning because we drove about 30 minutes away to a nearby city or town, and they had a bunch of the old brick square storefronts and all of that look at least 20s, if not earlier, and just that unique flair that you don't see in buildings now. And it's the freaking communist architecture where it's all just square buildings. Oh
man. Funny thing was, I actually went to Minneapolis back in high school. I think when it was when I was in the high choir, they take all the students to some major city and perform there once a year. And we went to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Minneapolis at the time was super commercialized, at least the parts I went to. St. Paul actually did a good job of keeping their local infrastructure intact. So there were no skyscrapers. All the buildings were preserved national landmarks, so they couldn't tear anything down, which I really hope St. Paul didn't get torn apart with everything that's happening in Minneapolis, because St. Paul is absolutely beautiful.
I never got to make it over to St. Paul when I've visited it twice. But I know that when I was there in 2018, the churches were still a major part of the you need to see this if you come visit.
Okay. I didn't see that because obviously high school choir trip, but
Yeah.
That'd be cool to see. Good to go back to that now, assuming things are calming down. I haven't heard anything from Minneapolis past when the second Chaz opened up there, but or what was the Minneapolis Chaz called? I'm not remembering the name of it. It didn't get as much.
I just remember it burning. I don't remember a Chaz.
Oh, it's I guess this one didn't really get covered. I think Matt might have covered it at one point, but there is in fact a second Chaz that happened in Minneapolis. It just never got as crazy as the Portland one, so it never got any coverage, but they did basically shut down a bunch of city streets.
I know that they shut down a big area around where George Floyd died, and they created like a giant memorial.
I think that's it. They basically just turned that area into a no-go zone for. It's now the beautiful, diverse neighborhood that's just for them. So
and they were doing baptisms there. No joke. Did you not hear about it?
No, it's like, oh my gosh, the George Floyd Eucharist just sounds like something that would definitely happen right about now. It's like when you take this, it becomes George Floyd when you consume it.
And it's very funny because so everybody was turning George Floyd into a saint. And then just recently, you see all of the salt now coming out because Kyle Rittenhouse, his bail was paid and now he's out of jail.
Yeah.
And you see all of this salt of people going, well, look at these people that donated to him and they all have criminal records. Okay. So now we're going to take the donors having criminal records as some kind of reason to not trust them. Meanwhile, you turn George Floyd into a saint.
Interesting. Very interesting. Oh, well, everything's screwed right now. I don't even know where to begin with everything that's happening right now. I know so many people are just feeling so demoralized at the moment. You know what I mean?
I don't blame them. I just was told by a friend of mine that somebody called into Rush Limbaugh crying because they were saying that their government doesn't care about them, and they're in Georgia.
Oh, geez. It was weird that Georgia flipped. Like, I thought that was going to go for Trump, but a lot of weird ones flip for Biden. You know what I mean?
When the left are very openly saying, quick, we need to move to Georgia so we can vote in the runoff election, I don't really trust the integrity of the Georgia vote.
Did someone actually say move a bunch of people to Georgia at some point?
Yes.
When was that?
It was over this last couple of weeks because they're talking about the runoff that's in January. They're having a special election in January, so they're like, we need to get more people into Georgia.
Is it even possible to get your vote changed at that point? Like, I don't know if
No, technically they're saying go and do something illegal is what they're saying to do. Okay,
so this is David Hogg telling Canadians to support Biden levels of corruption. Okay.
Yeah, it was funny because Steven Crowder made a joke about this specifically, and then like 3 days later, somebody in the mainstream was saying to go and do this.
Oh my gosh. Wow, what a strange world we're living in now. And it feels like it's only going to get weirder. Are things locking down near where you are right now? Because my state just decided to go back to almost back to where they were 6 months ago levels of lockdowns.
Fortunately, DeSantis has said that he is not going to shut down anything. He's not doing a second shutdown, so it's going to be up to the municipals and the cities. And even, I think with the last one, he might have made some warnings the first time, but we never had a state-enforced lockdown. We had city-enforced lockdowns, and my city was unfortunately one in my county that was with mandates, but others in my county were not mandated issues a couple months ago.
Well, thank the Lord. I can still depend on my Disney trip happening in like 2 weeks, so...
Hopefully nothing happens in Orlando.
I swear if it get canceled again, I'm gonna blow a gasket had my Orlando trip canceled for the same reason 9 months apart. That would be insane if that actually happened.
If it happens, you can thank Orlando and not DeSantis.
Gosh, I can't. What would they possibly pull? Like, oh, we're not allowing flights in now all of a sudden. What are you gonna do with that?
It's interesting because if you notice, they've said international travel is okay to go and you're allowed to do international travel, but you're not allowed to have Thanksgiving dinner.
Are they saying that in Florida, or are that just other states that
That's
are saying that?
nationally. I think that's nationally. They've allowed international travel again.
I didn't even know that. I knew you technically could do it, but I was under the impression that it was being like highly discouraged at the moment. Just beyond, I mean, I'm sure there's not a lot of actual like vacationing happening at the moment, but good grief. I mean, I do know anyone that's actually going to obey the Thanksgiving directive. I mean, I might know like maybe 3 people, but everyone else I know is just like, we're not canceling Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I don't know anybody that's not doing Thanksgiving.
The only person I know for sure who's canceling Thanksgiving is someone who actually contracted the coronavirus and they don't want to like go infect the rest of their family, which that's fine. Don't get everyone sick, but that's different than like, oh, we can't have a party this year because if we're around each other, we're going to get each other sick. What a joyless lot of people.
Well, you're not allowed to hug. No fun, no joy, no creativity, ever.
Live in a box, or eat bugs, don't hug your family, don't attend Thanksgiving, Christmas is canceled.
You're not allowed to own anything. Be happy.
I wish I knew that whole, you know that the I don't want to live in a box spiel from Twitter, right?
I think so.
I wish I had that whole rant memorized because it's funny, but good grief, every day I'm just like, they're gonna get a little creepier every day. And apparently Britain's now planning to ban gas cars in the next decade or two for some reason, which is California tried to do and failed.
I thought they did pass that in California. Did they not get it?
I thought they failed. I could be horribly wrong on that point, but if they actually did pass it, the California is screwed. But
I know that I think I saw an article that said they are aiming to go gasless by like 2050 or 2030.
Hey, a 30-year directive isn't that bad, but saying, hey, we're going to get rid of an entire type of car in 10 years that's I'll say conservatively that's ambitious, quote unquote.
But how much do you trust them to not step on the gas?
I don't trust them at all because they mess up everything they touch. Just look at the election this year. We're still counting votes after a month.
We knew it was going to happen, though.
I hoped it wasn't on election night. I don't know if you saw my stream, but I was just sitting there like, oh, this is we're gonna be done. We'll have an idea what's gonna happen by the end of the night. And I went to sleep around 11, and half the states weren't called. I'm like, screw it, I don't care anymore. Woke up, and Biden won. And I just was like, okay, what the frick happened in the 5 hours I was asleep?
Fortunately, that's what everybody else was thinking that stayed up later than you, so you really didn't miss a lot.
Yeah, I think I woke up angry just because I was completely befuddled as to what the heck was happening, but at the very least, I was happy I didn't bother to stay awake the entire time, because I knew people that did, and they were ripping their hair out by like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no. That was obviously going to take a little bit longer than an overnight to figure this out. And at this point, I mean, people are still pulling their hair out thinking that we're going to get information tomorrow every single day, and it's just, guys, let it play out.
At this point, I don't have much hope that anything's going to change. Like, even all the lawsuits that are happening right now, it's like a lot of this just feels like it's kind of it's yelling into the wind. I don't know. Unless they actually have something really substantive, there's really no way this is going to work out.
Are you total black pill now?
I'm not really, just because I don't think Biden is the end of the world. I mean, I've gotten into arguments with a lot of people about this, and I don't, even as someone who's not, I really don't like Biden. Like, I if you know anything about what he did to Clarence Thomas and anything about his record, he is awful as a politician. He is completely awful, and I think I'm mad that he got elected. But I do not think that he's going to have the power to rip the country apart in a way a lot of people think he's going to be able to. If only just because now without the Senate, he's not going to be able to pack the court, and he's not going to be able to push through every single thing he wants to do. He's going to do a lot of bullcrap with the executive powers, which means Obamacare is going to come roaring back to its the way it was right around the election last time. But that's what happens when you screw with an executive powers too much. Is now every president can just legislate half of what they want to do with the flick of a pen, and that's not new, but it sucks. But I don't know. I mean, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like this is a complete defeat in some ways. It just feels like a setback. I mean, everything is going to end up getting relitigated within the next 4 years, and if nothing else, it's going to shut up some people on the far left for a couple weeks. So that's going to be nice. I mean, your trade-off is: do you want to get yelled at online every single day for the rest of the time, or do you want to just bite the bullet and accept that we're occasionally going to lose elections and just make do with what we got? Because at the very least, I don't think all the important rights that we have are going to get screwed over under Biden when he can't control the Senate or the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So I'm not necessarily worried about my gun rights, but I'm definitely worried that my concealed carry license is probably going to get screwed over. But what are you going to do at that point? You can't control everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can only even just respond to whatever actually comes, because we can project and project and project, and no projection actually means anything until it comes to pass.
Yeah, and things are very different when they hit the ground as opposed to when you're kind of thinking about how it's supposed to work either way. So, I don't know. How do you feel about everything right now?
What's that?
You were going to say something about Alaska, but how are you feeling about everything in general then?
I think that Trump is going to win.
You still think he is at this point?
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of information that we don't have, especially because you can't release case information before it actually goes to litigation. That's a very important part of building a legal case against somebody, is you never want your information or the case that you're building to go into the court of public opinion before you actually present it to the judge, because that public opinion can sway results, even if it's not true. You know, look at what happened to Chauvin.
Yeah.
It's why this kind of stuff should be kept private until it goes to the correct way, because you can end up with innocent people losing because you have... Or you give your opponents time to build a case against you that they should not have had the time to build.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting if he actually did have something that could, completely up through the election, which, holy crap, suddenly everything Trump's done for the past 4 years would be, vindicated 1,000%, being like, see, I told you every single one of them is lying all the time, and everything is against me all the time, and man, that would just change, the entire national mood overnight, and just throw every narrative under the bus at once. But I mean,
I've heard other people say if they thought they were winning, then their propaganda wouldn't be hitting as hard as it is right now. And so I have hope that they are running right now, very nervous. And it's not over. I don't have any evidence, and obviously it's going to be like, well, it's just, I have to have faith right now. But it's not the first time I've ever had faith.
Well...
And I just have to wait for the results to come.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean... I think we can make whatever happens work no matter who wins, even because of our congressional gains. The part of the problem with the assumption around the Trump vote is just that if the fact that they can't reveal anything makes it look like they really don't have anything, and a lot of the suits they've already put up aren't paying off in ways that people want. They've already filed suit in a couple states and they've all been thrown out. Which that's not a good sign in terms of how things are going to go in the 2 or 3 big states that Trump would need to actually flip in order to win for himself. Which it's not impossible at this point, but it is funny that a bunch of the Vegas betting people are absolutely refuse to pay out any of their things right now because they still consider this to be completely open.
Well, to be fair, has not actually been a declared winner of the election yet.
Yeah, I mean, is it?
I mean, a legally declared winner.
Is that just because Trump's pushing it, or is it because they still don't have an answer? That's the important question. Is if it's just because Trump's trying to relitigate every single step in the process, then yeah, it's different than if we were still literally counting the votes a month later, which is not impossible at this point. I would believe it if you told me that Nevada was still counting, but
well, the electors have not been chosen, and states haven't been certified yet. So technically, legally, there hasn't been a declared winner yet certified. That's more or less what I mean. If we go by the very specific rules of legality, it's not there yet.
I heard that if they don't have a decision by the day they're supposed to vote, which is like mid-December, Pence becomes the de facto president or something like that, which that would be funny. I've always said my favorite possible outcome of the election would be what I call the Richard III option, which is Mike Pence just uses this as a massive power move to become president for life all of a sudden.
To become president for life?
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm gonna betray Trump and screw over Biden and make myself the most powerful president ever. It would be funny if Pence did turn out to be the most Machiavellian politician in world history.
Anything could happen at this point. It's 2020.
That would be like the soap opera ending to 2020, as Mike Pence just takes the lead all of a sudden, and now he's the ruler.
The question is this the season finale or the series finale?
Series finale of Earth. That's. Oh my! I'd like to think I have another couple months to live. I've got too many books I need to read right about now. I don't know. I don't want to be dead by January. That's not a happy thought.
You have at least until the Temple of Jerusalem is rebuilt.
Woo!
Whenever.
Start
your stopwatch then.
Oh, that's gonna be a fun day when that happens. It's like, hey, guys, we're tearing down the Dome on the Rock. That's gonna go over well, isn't it? Good lord. Anyway, I feel like I feel like I came into this with like three things I wanted to talk about specifically, but I'm not remembering what they were. But so you've been covering a lot of like political extremism on your channel recently. I watched your Ibram X Kennedy video. What else have you been kind of covering of late that's been kind of on your mind?
So right now I'm reading In Defense of Looting by Vicky whatever its name is.
Oh my gosh, that sounds... You read it so we don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I did this with Ibram's book, and I'm doing this with this person's book, is I do live reads on Parler. So while I go through the book, I post anything that's either interesting or obviously educational from our point of view to get into their mind, or anything that's ridiculous. Because there's a lot of garbage in there where it just feels like reading word salad. But if anybody wants to read any of these problem books with me, I do live reads on Parler.
Oh my gosh. I haven't had the patience to try to read many of them. I have read one or two. I read the new Jim Crow while I was doing initial research on my book. And that is a big oof, I'll tell you that.
What did you find out in that?
It's a complicated argument. I mean, my favorite part was when the writer called MTV's Flavor of Love a modern day minstrel show, which I don't watch MTV, so maybe I might be wrong, but I generally do not associate white people consuming black culture to be a form of like blackface in any sort of modern sense. But
yeah,
I mean, the whole book is essentially just this long spiral of the writer claiming that all of the problems among young black men are caused by over-policing, and that it's 100% wrong, and there's no reason why the cops would have any reason to go after. I'm trying to be very gentle about how I phrase this, because I'm not trying. I don't like to think I'm that spicy, but she's making the case that like the 100% that because there's so many young black men in jail just because of the war on drugs, and there's no way to defend it, and anyone who's ever supported it needs to essentially pay penance for the fact that they disenfranchised an entire generation of young black men specifically. And it's a complicated set of arguments to dig through because there's a lot to it that she either just kind of addresses or writes off completely. Like she completely writes off any of the family structure issues in the black community. Mm-hmm. She most of the actual examples she uses are just anecdotes. Like she'll find cases of like a couple of really effed up cases of like some single mom who has like an ounce of weed on her who goes to jail for 5 years. And I mean, yeah, that sucks. I'm pretty libertarian on like the weed stuff. I don't care if people do it. They should just not bother, honestly. It's not the biggest problem in the world, but a lot of it just comes down to her being extremely accusatory towards anyone that might think that the 90s war on crime might have been justified at all, even though anyone who lived in cities like New York and LA at the time would tell you that regardless of what skin color you were, everyone supported the war on crime because it was a big deal back then. And yet nowadays everyone's like, yeah, if you're that pro anti-crime, you obviously just want to throw black men in jail. And I'm like, no, New York City was awful in the 80s and 90s.
Ibram makes the same connection in his book. I think I don't remember if I put any of those quotes in my video, but he makes the argument, and he did it with his bully, because he mentions this bully in the book from when he was a kid named Smurf, and Smurf was violent, and this kid that just put a gun to his stomach and was like, you scared? You scared? And then when Ibram was like, no, I'm not scared, blah, 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 Smurf ran off. But then Smurf and his friends stole a Walkman from this Indian kid on the back of the bus and then beat him up and then ran off. And Ibram just stood there watching because he didn't want to betray the other black kids by fighting the other black kids. But then he goes, this was white racism. But that's getting away where he goes, so the war on crime was a war against people like Smurf and people like me, because Smurf and I are the same thing. And so then what is that exactly saying? Is that this specific black man is associating being black with being a criminal. Because war on crime did not say that black was criminality.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, crime in different parts of the country has very different effects. Like, it's true that there's a lot of drug use, like, on the Appalachians, but it's very different when a redneck couple blows up their trailer trying to make a meth lab in the middle of the forest, as opposed to when someone in the city is handing out crack on a schoolyard. Like they're two very different issues brought about by the way those kind of environments work. And obviously, drug use is a bad idea, and you shouldn't engage in that culture. And there's a lot of people that are stuck in bad cycles of poverty, and don't realize that they shouldn't be engaging in this, so they just do it, and they don't realize that they shouldn't be doing it until it's too late. But and it's not like these are easy issues at all. But what the people like Kennedy and Michelle Alexander, who did New Jim Crow, they summarize it as one single issue on one what's the term? Just one level of reality, and they say everything else is just an outgrowth of that. And it is such a one-dimensional way of looking at all these problems.
Trying to think of, there was something specific that I wanted to mention out of In Defense of Looting. Number one is, it's very ironic that the author, and I have difficulty with this because the author is trans male to female, and in the very beginning of the book, the author associates being feminine with being irrational and being violent. And I'm like, I think you're just mentally ill, and then blaming it on your turning into a female. But I think it's kind of offensive to say I'm becoming a female because I'm irrational and I like to break things, and that's a feminine thing.
I don't know. I know some people that would call that very based. I don't know. It depends on. It depends how woke you are on the woman question, I guess.
This is true, but this person. Let's see. Where was I going to go with that? The first thing that's ironic is they say the whole first part of looting, defense for looting, is that owning property and the idea of personal property is white supremacist. The very idea, and then they associate property like a television or, you know, bread or whatever that you would loot is the same thing as a slave, because at one point slaves were considered property. So a Samsung television is the same as a slave. And so what the slaves had to do was loot themselves in order to free themselves. Thus, looting equals anti-slavery.
It's hard not to laugh at that. I mean, why would you bend over that far backwards just to defend an idea like that? Being like, oh, like every single person in the country watches those videos and is like, well, that's not bad. And there's like the one person that says, well, actually, it's a good thing because.
She talks about those people, the ones that say, no, looting is totally okay. And if you say that it's just an outsider that's trying to do this, then you're hurting the movement.
What is that? I guess if you're like a complete communist and you just want to destroy everything, then yeah, sure, this helps your cause in some marginal way.
So this is one of the ironic things. They don't believe in personal property, and it's white supremacist for personal property, but the white settlers came and stole the land from the Indians. How? If there's no personal property and owning property, does that mean that the Native Americans were white supremacists?
This is interesting.
And then the most recent chapter, I'm like middle of chapter 6 out of chapter 9. The most recent chapter, they've been going on a rant about how not nonviolent tactics. So first, there's no such thing as nonviolent tactics, and then trying to associate, well, nonviolence and self-defense are like something that aren't supposed to be things that can align. However, you have a much more polite society when everybody has a gun. But they try to act like having a gun and being nonviolent is some revolutionary thing that Rosa Parks did. But then, this major tactic of not nonviolence, but they don't want to use violence, but it's not nonviolence.
There's so much BS philosophizing on the far left about all of these things that just it's if they were honest, they would just admit that this is all just reactionary thinking, and they're just arguing in circles to make it sure that they get the result they want regardless of what argument they actually have to take. So it doesn't matter if they completely contradict themselves or if they make arguments that are essentially identical to like white supremacist arguments. They just get what they want, and in the end, and what they want is just the communist revolution and
control and power.
Yeah, that's all they really. It's at the end of the day, that's all that it really amounts to. It's just power skyrocketing to the same place with the least amount of effort or the least amount of resistance. Mm-hmm. And I hate saying that because I don't like being completely cynical about people, because I know lots of people that have genuine beliefs, and there are generally, when I meet progressives, they all have usually personal reasons why they have those beliefs, and a lot of it's just interpersonal or experiences and stuff like that. And I get it. People are reactionary. They do things based on how they're raised and how they view the world. But it's infuriating just watching people just argue themselves in circles and just watching the Twitter communists argue the same stupid points over and over again, like, landlords are oppression.
Well, not realizing that the landlord does a bunch of stuff for you. Yeah, there is a huge whole section in there with landlords stealing all of your wages from working in the fields, and so what do the landlords ever do for you? And they're holding you down, and this is why poor people and slaves can never do better, because they have to pay the landlords.
Oh, gosh. Landlords for communists are just like roads for libertarians. It's just the place where every single one of their ideas just goes off the road completely. Just drop landlords in a group full of communists and just watch the punches fly. It's so easy. People are so dumb nowadays. And I don't know.
What was the rest of that thought?
I'm just trailing off because I'm just thinking about how crazy all this is. Like, my brain's just going in 1,000 directions. Like, what the frick? It's like the Tim and Eric sketch where the Tim and Eric in the universe. Bwah, bwah.
A lot of this has to do with projection too, and that's real. I don't know if you saw this. What race is the person that wrote the new Jim Crow?
She's a Black New York Times contributor.
Okay, so I'm asking this because you're going to get a different perspective from like Robin DiAngelo in White Fragility versus reading Ibram X. Kendi's book because you got a white woman and a black man.
But is it really that different though? I mean, they both kind of have the same presupposition.
You're going to have the same presupposition, but you're going to be projecting it differently. So if Robin DiAngelo is uncomfortable around black people, then she's going to call everybody else racist because when she's approaching a group of black people, she says she's uncomfortable. Everybody else must think like I do. Did you
review White Fragility for your channel yet? Or is that...
I have not, but it's sitting on... The ebook is sitting on my computer.
Yeah, I don't know if you've Carrie Ann Borsenko. I don't know if you've seen her channel, but she did a full series of videos on that book, and she just talked about the fact that the book is just toxic nonsense that from beginning to end, and it's one of those things where obviously they're starting at the presupposition and working their way backwards. But Robin DiAngelo is so solipsistic, it's insane. Like she is absolutely committed to the thesis, and she will not tolerate any dissent at all.
Her thesis
that all white people are racist and all white people need to sit down and shut up.
Okay, that's what I wanted to double check was her thesis.
I mean, yeah, the entire point is if you think you're not racist and you say you're not racist when someone calls you racist, that's just white fragility because you're too fragile to be talking about the real truth of lived experience about people who can tell you're racist, but you don't believe it. The examples she uses are hilarious. I mean, I'll have to find the video that I think it's Carrie Ann did and send that to you because it's funny just how how deep the rabbit hole of that book goes. Like I almost want to read it just out of curiosity, but I absolutely refuse to give her money. I will not engage in the leftist irony of giving a white woman billions of dollars to tell everyone how bad they are.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's just the most progressive thing in the world. It's like, we're going to make a white woman rich to stop racism.
Well, when I do my live read, because I'm sure that's one of the books that I will need to live read, there will be blurbs posted. But the presupposition of every white person is racist and needs to shut up. You go to Ibram X. Kendi, and he admits that he too, as a black man, was racist. And you were earlier talking about you're not sure where you land on the spicy radar, so you were being careful of what you were saying.
Well, I try not to be overly spicy because I'm a people person and I don't like pissing people off. But
I'm a robot, so I don't really feel it. But Ibram in there, how much more spicy can you get than being, you have to take this from the black man. Imagine if it was any other race, where he goes, the only authentic version of a black person is the poor black person in the ghetto. And thus I moved to the ghetto to be around the authentic black people.
That is the most racist thing I've ever heard in my life.
And then he also goes on about how in college, friends all thought that she was the hotter of her roommates. But after so long, he realized he was a racist for dating her because she was a lighter-skinned dark person. And why did his friends all think that the lighter-skinned dark person was hotter than the darker-skinned black people? And so he had to dump her and then swore off any other black people that were lighter-skinned black people and would only date darker-skinned black people.
Oh my lord. I've gone on dates with women from freaking Nigeria. I am less racist than freaking Ibram X. Kendi. I take pride in this fact. Good lord.
And then going back to projection, a lot of it, if you're in there, he talks about being in a class. I mean, he was failing his high school classes, but somehow he got into like an advanced high school class because his parents were like, you should take this. And he's looking at his classmates who are mostly white and Asian and then thinking, He never once actually heard that from them or asked them or even talked about them not welcoming him into the class. He just goes, I know what they think of me. And so then I'm going to act because they all think that I shouldn't be here.
Oh my gosh.
My teachers only treat me this way because I'm a black kid, is what he said. But he didn't have any evidence of it. All he could do was go, well, what if I was white? Would I be treated the same way? Well, I could ask the same question of, if I looked different, if I was hotter, would I be treated the same way as I'm treated? You can't go down this road of, but what if I would have been treated completely different if I was something else?
Good Lord. Did you read Tucker Carlson's book, Ship of Fools?
I did not yet.
He has a whole chapter on Ta-Nehisi Coates, which Ta-Nehisi Coates is a wonderful rabbit hole to go down if you haven't read any of his stuff. He is. Well, funny thing is, actual black identitarians have called him out essentially of being like the white guilt guy, who all he does is he makes white people feel better by telling them how bad they are. It's like, and even like Cornel West at Harvard's like, yeah, this guy is a hack. But Carlson did a whole chapter talking about like Ta-Nehisi Coates' experience, and the only real racial incidents that he mentions in his book are like non-incidents, like people like giving him side eyes in public and stuff like that. And yet his entire career is based off of like a handful of racist incidents that he implies greater meaning out of just based on what he thinks it meant. And he's built this whole career talking about his blackness and his authenticity and his ability and his identity. And his most famous thing is he's most famous for taking that away from people. Like when Kanye did all his stuff, Ta-Nehisi Coates essentially took away his black card in public and said, "You're not one of us. You want to be white."
There was, what was it? In Defense of Looting made some situation where it said like class and race were connected. I think I read that the other day. And so technically I was telling people on Parler, don't forget that when you file for your financial stuff, that you are economically black if you're poor.
This is why I throw Hillbilly Elegy at freaking everyone. Like, have you read Hillbilly Elegy? You absolutely need to, because it is one of the best written memoirs of the past like decade, and it is about a poor white person growing up in an abusive household in Appalachia, and it is such a heartbreaking exploration of what it's like to grow up in essentially a redneck neighborhood where it's almost impossible to break the cycle of poverty and get out of that situation. And I mean, the book was briefly popular in like 2016 because he briefly became the writer briefly became the Trump whisperer and started explaining to liberals why they didn't understand the white working class. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, well, we can't pander to them anymore because they're all racists. So now this book that's one of the most earnest and well-meaning stories of what it means to be stuck in cycles of poverty. It kind of has this stink as the white identity movie, the white identity book, and it's such a stupid reputation because anyone who's actually read it knows that's not true. But I tell everyone I know to read it, and I've given away copies of it.
Imagine being that guy and being like, this is the life that I've lived and the struggles that I've had, and I'm being honest with you about all of this. And then you hear Bernie Sanders up there going, white people don't know what it's like to be poor.
He should know better than that. He's from freaking Brooklyn. Like, he couch surfed for 50 years. That
doesn't count as poor. You got a roof over your head.
I guess. I mean, I guess there's living in. I mean, if you don't own anything, you're pretty poor. Even if you have friends that'll let you bum.
Yeah.
That's just being lucky.
Yeah.
Anyway, you said you had somewhere else to go tonight. Do you have to when do you have to go time-wise?
We're good for a little longer if you want to keep going.
Okay.
If you had anything else.
I thought about trying to bring up the serial killer stuff because we've had a lot of good discussions interpersonally about your fascination with serial killers. Although you haven't done as much of that lately, so I wasn't. I didn't know.
It's creepy, I swear.
No, I mean it's interesting. I went through a phase last year where I was listening to a lot of that just because I was fascinated by the idea of ultimate evil and just kind of putting myself in the mindset of someone who goes that far. I mean, one of my favorite books of all time is Paradise Lost, just because I think it's fascinating to be in the mindset of what it means to be the ultimate rebel and the ultimate purveyor of evil. So I completely understand that fascination. Although,
sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it helps to also put thought into the opposite of that, which is why I haven't done it as much lately. But I do think that there is something to it.
Whenever I get it done, I don't know when it's gonna get done. But one of my projects, I really got into studying Jeffrey Dahmer because I think that he is a good story of the prodigal son, that it's really overlooked because people only really remember him going to jail after his crimes and then also getting murdered a year and a half later. And I don't know if people are aware of the journey that he went through while he was in jail, where he was baptized and he worked with a pastor and he thought about killing himself, but he was like, I don't have the ability to do that. And he found Christ. And I don't think a lot of people know that weekly, and his father even contacted this specific pastor when the pastor took the summer off to work on his youth thing that he did with his church. Lionel Dahmer specifically contacted the pastor and was like, please don't give up on my son. He really needs you. And the pastor was like, I told Jeff I'd be gone for like 2 or 3 weeks. That's it. I'll be back to working with him soon. But the pastor... there's like 1 or 2 interviews with him that you can find on YouTube. His name was Roy Ratcliffe. And he told Jeff, I'm going to come and see you every single day until every single week until one of us dies. And he kept that up until Jeff died the Thanksgiving weekend. But but when I talk about the prodigal son story, you're a Christian person, so I know that you know the story, is you just fall to your worst, and you're never beyond the touch of Christ's redemption if you come seeking earnestly. And some people have to be backed into that corner before they start looking for it again. So that is often overlooked with Jeff, and then you've also obviously got people that'll say, I don't know if I should believe that he actually changed. Roy Ratcliffe wrote a book about his interactions with Jeff, and it's worth a look at for the different perspective that you get with interacting with Jeff, but also with the interactions within the church, because Roy's church actually asked him, why would you go to this person and offer him a chance at heaven, and got mad at Roy for offering salvation.
Oh, geez.
So it's a very interesting, and then Roy also talks about how he was prepared to work with somebody like Jeff without knowing it, because some years ago he had been suicidal when he'd lost his job as a pastor. And so then when Jeff later said, I feel like killing myself, but I was told to live because why didn't Wisconsin give me the chair? Roy was like, better how to deal with it because he personally had felt suicidal. And so he thanked God for giving him that experience that helped him become a different person. Anyway, I fell hard into looking at Jeff's story because of this prodigal son fall. And this ties back into my project called Cain and Abel, where you have that 2 sides of the human heart, where it's to do good and to do evil. And that's one of the things I'm obsessed with in my writing. And this book takes Jeff's life and fictionalizes parts of it, but takes you on the journey of his descent and just how out of control you can get when you're listening to the desire in your heart that wants to feed your impulses rather than look at the truth, and how you can delude yourself at what you're seeing.
Yeah, and he's an extreme example of that. So
it's a lot easier to see information when it's taken to an extreme.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that the people around him were like, why would you go minister to this person? I'm like, there's so many people on Twitter I've seen who are like, I could never believe in God because there's a possibility that Hitler could have been redeemed. And I'm like, well, I don't think he would have meant it if he did the whole Homer Simpson, I'm just going to live my life as a heathen and beg for forgiveness on my deathbed. Like, I don't think that's exactly what happened, but I do think that there is something to that idea of just going about as far as you can into the wrong direction and still being redeemed in some way, even though I don't think most people are even aware of that redemption, just because his life story up until that point is so nuts.
The question is, I think, for when I'm looking at the perspective, is pride, because pride is, in my opinion, the worst of the deadly sins, because it'll stop you from asking for help when you need help. And that's ultimately what dooms you. What's the word that I want? Humble yourself in order to ask for help. And so the question is, if Hitler at the end of his life, would he humble himself? He killed himself when he was backed into a corner. I don't think so. But we really don't have a way to judge his heart. One of the things Roy brings up in his book when he was talking to his congregation is, so are you saying that God's blood and mercy was not strong enough to cover some sins? And so if the blood of Christ could not cover Jeffrey Dahmer because what he'd done was so bad, then there are other things that God can't do. And do you think that's true?
Well, I don't, but I'm...
That goes to the people that go, some people just can't be saved. Their pride stops them from being saved, not their actions.
Yeah, I mean, people tend to... I had a thought, but I don't exactly know where I was going to take it. But I'm kind of blacking out. I haven't drunken enough today, so.
Oh no.
I was like wasted yesterday, but anyway.
I can't even tell if you're joking.
Well, I was wasted yesterday, but I don't usually get wasted, so.
Okay.
Anyway, what are you gonna do with the story then? You said you're gonna fictionalize aspects of his life and kind of build a narrative out of it?
So I've already written the first draft of that book, and it needs to get edited. And where I was originally going to go with that was, once it's done, I don't know when it's going to be done, but I'll send you a copy because you said you were interested in that mindset, or true crime and like that. And what really got me into true crime and studying criminals is, it's really easy to forget that these are people behind all of these actions because you only ever hear about them from their actions.
Yeah.
But it's also very strong case studies into how events affect people mentally, because different things hit everybody only a certain number of ways. An abuse victim can either become an abuser or they escape the abuse. And so when we look at serial killers, we can see how certain events and logic played out in their minds that created the actions that drove them. And it gives us a way to look at smaller things to try to help people before they get that far.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an anathema to the way people tend to think nowadays. Like, I wrote a piece recently about the Joker movie and how I used it as a jumping off point to talk about why I don't think leftists have a really good understanding of moral good and moral evil. Mm-hmm. Because if you start with the presumption that people are naturally good and that there are just these weird people on the margins of society that do bad things and that we can make society perfect by just kicking the bad people out, and then all of a sudden all will be left with the good people. Well, then you don't wonder how bad people, or what even badness is, or where these people come from, how they manifest, how they come into being. Like, there was that famous, I don't even know if it's famous, but a hilarious tweet I saw a couple months ago by some Twitter communist saying, like, well, we don't need police. We're just going to fix society by giving people exactly enough of what they need so they don't feel the need to go become criminals. And I'm like, you don't know anything about people if you legitimately think that the only reason people commit crime or rape or murder is because they don't have enough bread. Like,
yeah.
People are way more complex than that. People have way more traumatic experiences that build into your person and that draw you into your pride and moral evil. And you have to understand what brings a person to that. And it's an anathema to the left because they need to have this narrative where all bad things come from the same place. And when they find the bad thing that doesn't come from the place they say it is, they just have to write it off as inconsequential because it doesn't fit within their story. And that's why people like Joker are just the movie Joker movie gets completely written off. It's just, it's the white male rage movie, because there's no reason why someone like him would feel the need to complain about society sucking, even though here's 1,000 reasons why Joker feels self-justified in that movie.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things with Joker that falls in line with the study of any of these serial killers is you can watch in each situation where he's given either an interaction with a person or a chance to make a choice, you can see his mind working and you can see how he's interacting with those things around him and how it's changing him. And that's one of the things the left doesn't get, because it feels like the left thinks that you are just born evil or you're born good, and then that's immutable. And so that's why you can just get rid of the bad people in society, and then all the bad people are gone because, well, now you've bred out the bad, and nobody else can turn.
Yeah, it's a completely unrealistic understanding of human beings. You just think that the badness is just an anathema, that it's not something that you have to understand or try to stop, but it really kind of speaks to the kind of moral decadence of that position, of that way of life, or just people that are just so rich and sheltered that they just can't conceive that someone out there could come from a life experience that's different from theirs. One second. Let's see if we can get this reconnected real quick. Why is this like once an episode now? 1 second. Ah, geez, I got a lot of messages. Okay, my internet went down for some reason. I'm going to turn it off and back on again. Okay, let's see if I can get this going. I think it's just about back, but I don't... Hey, my internet killed itself. Are you back?
Oh, no! Was it killed or was it murdered?
It was Epstein. I don't know which.
Okay.
So what were you saying something just as we cut off, or was I don't know.
No, you were...
What was I saying before you cut off? I kind of got distracted when it fell apart.
Yeah, I understand. We were talking about the very flatness of just everything is good or born evil, and there's no complexity to any of that.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a deterministic way to look at people in some ways, but I'm also getting a lot more like overtly Machiavellian in my viewpoint of how people work and how people grow and function in life. So I'm like, I don't know, at this point, if people have to actually be honest about the nature of what it means to be human, otherwise you're just gonna keep making utopian nonsense. And it's why people keep screwing up on the left and making horrible societies.
One of the things that helps fix that is if you recognize that it is a choice to do good or a choice to do evil every single day. And every choice that you make goes to one of those ways to either hurt or help. And if you don't recognize anybody outside of yourself and you just think of whatever you want or you need or you have the way, then it kind of leads you down a path of more evil. I think Crowder, said it better than me when he was talking about training his new dog. Because his new dog, he did this whole thing about how he had to out-train his dog from chasing after what it desired. Because if you chase after what you desire, just because your heart tells you that you want that thing doesn't necessarily mean it is a good thing for you.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up in my book, Cain and Abel, which is the Jeffrey Dahmer inspired book, is he's trying to solve his loneliness. He is very, very lonely. His biggest fear is that he's going to be alone, but he doesn't have interpersonal skills. That's one of the things that I kind of extracted from Jeff as a person, is he was very socially awkward, and he might have had very high social anxiety because he got drunk a lot in order to interact with people. And so he very desperately did not want to be alone. But he also didn't know how to talk to people, so he could not solve how to not be alone. And so in Cain and Abel, he's got this person in his head, obviously Cain, for very, very biblical reasons, telling him how to fix that problem. Okay, so you don't want to be alone? Well, let's go pick somebody up from the bar. You don't want that person to leave so that you're alone? Then we're going to kill them because they can't leave. And it makes logical sense, even if it's irrational. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think someone like that. I mean, obviously they have flawed moral foundations if they come to that conclusion, but it's people do something like that because it makes sense to them in some level.
That's what's behind a bunch of the leftists too. This was in the biography by Brian Masters, which I highly recommend Brian Masters if you want a really good serial killer. He did one for Jeff and one for Dennis Nilsson and one for Rose West. He is fantastic, and he does a psychological case and also the legal case for all of his subjects. And one of the things in one of the quotes in his book on Jeff is that people often chase irrational reasoning towards, or rational and logical reasoning towards an irrational end, or an illogical end, inconsequential end. And that's what a lot of people do. Is it's completely bizarre what they're doing. You know, get rid of cow farts and we can save the world. But in their head, it makes perfect sense.
Because it's all moving towards what they conceive as the good, at least from as they see it. So it's not like the average leftist is like some totally malevolent. Yeah, it's not. They're like they're not completely malevolent monsters or anything, but they're very misplaced.
And this is also where there's a big separation between moderates and conservatives, and then the left wing, because the left wing will look at a moderate conservative and be like, "You're just evil if you don't agree with me." Whereas the moderates and the conservatives can make logical sense and go, "Okay, so this is what you're trying to solve. This is what you're doing to solve it. I don't think it's going to work." They don't even try to follow the logic of a conservative. It's just, if you agreed with me, no, you wouldn't be evil. You wouldn't be like you if you agreed with me. And the only reason that you don't agree with me has to be because you're evil and you want to hurt people.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Haidt talks about that in his book, The Righteous Mind, where the average, like when you do studies with conservatives and liberals, the average conservative can accurately and charitably describe what a liberal believes and do so in a way that makes it sound like understandable, but very rarely can a liberal or progressive actually do the same. It's because they don't understand the conservative moral foundations.
And they don't even try.
I mean, most people, I don't know how much most people actually try to do these things, because a lot of mental process is just kind of automatic. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure if leftists put a little more effort into it, they could, but they don't have a reason to, so they don't try.
Well, why would you? That person is evil, so why would you try to understand them? I see that reasoning a lot, and that falls into what I also see in fiction happening. So, recently I read When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, and she normally is a romance author, and there's lots of drama over there. But this book is about a black woman living in some made-up neighborhood in New York, and the whole idea of it is that the white people are moving in and then getting rid of the non-white people by gentrification. And there's this whole plot behind it that there's a big white cabal that's been going on since the 1600s to abduct black people, that this all culminates in literally a black or a white person cabal in an old abandoned hospital at the end of the book, sitting around a table laughing about how they're getting rid of the black people in this neighborhood, and then they're going to just gentrify all of it.
It's like the evil council from Darkest Dungeons.
Yes, you know, with one Asian and one traitor black person amongst the rest of the white people, and how they're also abducting these people that they're taking out of their homes in this neighborhood and keeping them in cells in this hospital to test, I think it was anti-meth drugs on them or something. I don't know. They were shooting them up with drugs and then trying to do anti-drugs on these people. And the way that the non-white people warded off the black people, or the white people, was they just set the whole neighborhood on fire to say, yeah, you better stay out, white people. But it was this assumption that every white person was evil and in on it. And it was so comedic. This is just playing on the whole idea of just being flat evil, flat terrible, and why they don't try to understand you. Is the white people in this book were so evil that anytime a non-white person would interact with them, they would throw their head back in laughter after saying something blatantly mean.
Oh my gosh. It's like that's like Get Out on crack.
Yeah, the main character went to this gas station that was on the street, or this what are they called in New York? It starts with a B. Bodega. This bodega on the corner. I've never been to New York. So the main character went to this bodega on the corner that used to be owned by a Middle Easterner, and then it was replaced with a white person and completely redone, and now they sell kombucha and fresh fruit. Because that's all part of white culture. And so then she's like, I just wanted alcohol. This chick gets drunk like every single day that's in this book, mind you. And so she goes and grabs a kombucha instead because they don't sell beer anymore. And so she gives the store clerk her $20 bill, and then he gives her a $5 back, and she's like, hey, you shorted me change. And he's like, nope.
Oh my Lord.
And so then her white friend that she's there with comes up and goes, bro, give us that $10 back. And he's like, I can't. The cash register's already closed, man. And so then the white friend purchases something, and then he goes, oh, sorry about the mix-up, my bro. Here's your $10 back. And so, like, you've got over-the-top situations like that with every single white person. You've even got a situation in there when new white neighbors walk up to the main white character that the main black female falls in love with. And so they're talking to him about him hanging out with this black chick. And they're like, you know, that's not really appropriate for you to do because we're supposed to stick with our kind. But, like, me and my wife totally understand how you're super into that because her and I, we go to the Caribbean at least once a year so that we can bang somebody that's, you know, not like us.
Oh my gosh.
Like, this is, and you'd think that it was a parody, but then you
This isn't a comedy?
This is not a comedy. This is supposed to be a thriller.
What in the heck?
Because it's supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be like Us. And I think Broken Window or something like that, if you go to the page. But it's supposed to be scary, and it's playing off this slave owners came in the 1600s, you know, the 1619 Project, where they go, white people came and enslaved everybody, and the Dutch pushed people around, and this has been going on for ages. And if you think of the conspiracy with the Jews running everything, the media, the banks, the police, the government, blah, 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 they do all of this, but it's white people.
Oh my gosh, that is insane.
And then you combine the ideology that you find in this with what you read in Ibram's books, in White Fragility, and you see that they are very serious. This isn't a joke. They see that this is what it is. But then when you've got your characters where they're throwing their heads back in laughter of evil, that's why they think they don't need to try to understand you, because there's no other reason that you could do this.
Yeah, and anyone who takes even the slightest amount of introspection thinks this is the stupidest thing they've ever heard in their life. Like, I get doing, like, weird abstract stuff to kind of explain complex concepts, but I don't think this writer is David Lynch. Like, this is not, like, we're not going to do the Blue Velvet, but it's about racism this time. Like, this is not what we're doing. So, good lord, that sounds unintentionally hilarious and terrifying all the same. And was that like a really popular book too? Yes, because she's very, very big. It's a USA Today and New York Times bestseller. As if I needed further confirmation that the New York Times bestseller list is completely useless. Oh, the fun thing is going to look at the comments and seeing people go, every white person should be required to read this book. Oh my gosh. Yeah. If you're gonna read white guilt books, at least read good ones. Like, I remember I read Sherman Alexie in high school, and he's actually kind of a funny guy. Like, he's a Native American activist, and he at least writes mournfully about what it means to live in a culture that's dying, and how you struggle to live in a culture that has with another culture that you have this complex history with. And, like, you know what? I read a book like that, and I can understand why someone would have very sensitive feelings about stuff like that. But you sound like that, and then, like, this isn't even good white guilt. This is just you are so brainwashed you don't even know what level of reality you're on. Yeah, at the time I was really thinking of gang stalking. Have you ever heard of gang stalking? Yes, I have. And you think every white person is, like, sneering at you or looking at you or talking about you, and then you look at this book and you're like, you really think everyone around you is trying to think of how they can
get you?
Well, you saw that. Did you see that tweet by the woman who ran the 1619 Project, who said that all when the riots were happening in New York, she said all the fireworks going off were a method by white people to condition black people to be fine living in a war zone. They're conspiracy theorists. That's exactly what they are. If they believed anything else, this is what they would call it.
I'd honestly call them mental patients, but
I mean, everyone's a little bit conspiratorial, so...
Conspiracies are fine, but some of them that think they're being gang-stalked by white people, I think are delusional and need some institutional help.
Oh, man. I mean, I don't even know what to do with, like, that kind of thing. It's like, how do you talk to someone who's that far off the path? Like... They have power, too, so it's crazy.
The only thing that I can ever think of is you can't get to the people that are in those high towers, because how are normal people like you or I going to get to talk to those? But you can only ask logical questions of the smaller people of going, okay, so if they're doing this, how does this make sense?
It's like the same people that are about to give Andrew Cuomo an Emmy because of his COVID-19 book commercials. Did you hear about that?
Yes, that's all just because they're all friends, though.
I guess, but good lord, that is an awful call considering how badly he managed the state of New York.
It at least feels more like gaslighting the public that know better to me than it feels like actual people. Because how else do you give a Nobel Peace Prize to... I don't even remember who it was.
Obama.
It was somebody like... It was like Hunter Biden was getting nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize this year when Trump was nominated for 3 actual peace treaties.
I wonder if Trump's actually going to get the Nobel Peace Prize for what he did or not.
Probably not.
That would be funny if he did, though.
It would. It would be hilarious.
I don't need that. Good lord, just the gall of him winning. That would be an interesting day if he had actually happened. It'd be he probably earned it more than Obama did, honestly.
Well, Obama dropped some bombs to get his.
Well, he got his within for like. He was nominated within 2 weeks of taking the oath of office. So he didn't do anything. He just existed and earned it because he was the first black president. So, good lord. So did you have anything else you wanted to talk about specifically, or did you want to just plug your book and?
Yeah, come and find me if you're a writer or want to be with other writers. What I started on my channel is a prompt game where every month I give out a prompt, and if you fill it out, I'm going to read your stuff online, and then you can plug in your guys' names so people can come and find other authors. I kind of want to build a new author community that doesn't suck. So you can find me on all of the social media at Kirkpatty Cake, and that's like Parler and Instagram and Twitter and Gab, and there was another one, Minds.
All the ones where, all the horrifically anti-Semitic ones, as they say in the media, as they say in journalism now.
Yeah,
like,
and you could...
They're going after Parler hard right now.
Oh, of course, because people are actually moving to Parler. Like, they bombed Gab before it got out there, but now big people are moving to Parler.
Well, Gab actually did fall apart before people started going after it. It was pretty nutty for a while, but...
Yeah, that's kind of why I had to stop using Gab actively, because I was like, this is pretty extreme over here, you guys. But the site looks really nice.
Oh, man.
If you could have the setup of Gab, but like the community of Parler, it would be a perfect matchup, because the infrastructure of Gab is really good.
Well, it's just full of very, very far-right people that want to talk about the same things over and over again, so... Anyway,
so, then you can also find my book Dead End Drive on all of your favorite book buying places. It's Amazon and books.org, bookshop.org, and Barnes and Noble, and everywhere.
All right.
So,
well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate talking with you.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking to you, Tyler.
Sure. Have a good night then.
You too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa LaFira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.